July 22nd, 1984, Clearwater Springs, Florida. There are crimes that scar a community forever, and killers who think they'll never be found. In the summer of 1984, when Madonna's Like a Virgin dominated radio waves and Ronald Reagan campaigned for re-election, a small Florida town would become the epicenter of a mystery that would haunt generations. What happened on that sweltering July night would shatter the illusion of safety in Clearwater Springs, a quiet community where neighbors knew each other's names and front doors remained unlocked. For nearly 4 decades, a family would live without answers. A killer would walk free, and a town would carry the weight of an unsolved murder that seemed destined to remain forever in the shadows. The victim was Jessica Lynn Mitchell, a 19-year-old college sophomore whose infectious laugh could light up any room. She had dreams of becoming a teacher, a boyfriend who adored her, and parents who believed their daughter was destined for greatness. On July 23, 1984, those dreams would be brutally cut short in a crime so shocking that it would leave investigators baffled for decades. Jessica's body was discovered at 6:47 a.m. by a jogger in Riverside Park, a popular recreation area where families gathered for weekend picnics and children played on rusted swing sets. She had been strangled with her own necklace, a delicate gold chain her grandmother had given her for her 18th birthday. The killer had left no obvious clues, no witnesses, and seemingly no motive. The Clearwater Springs Police Department, a small force of 12 officers led by Chief Robert Manning, had never investigated a homicide. Their experience consisted mainly of traffic violations, domestic disputes, and the occasional break-in. They were unprepared for the media circus that would descend upon their town, the pressure from state authorities, and the complexity of a murder investigation that would test every resource they possessed. Within hours of the discovery, news vans lined Main Street. Reporters from Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville transformed the sleepy town into a media spectacle. The Mitchell family found themselves thrust into an unwanted spotlight, their grief becoming public property as cameras captured their every tear and desperate plea for justice. Detective Frank Morrison, a 20-year veteran who had transferred to Clearwater Springs for what he thought would be a peaceful end to his career, found himself leading the most important case of his life. Morrison was methodical, experienced, and determined, but even he couldn't have predicted how this investigation would consume not just months, but decades of his life. The initial investigation yielded frustrating results. Jessica had no known enemies, no ex-boyfriends with violent tendencies, and no involvement in drugs or dangerous activities. She was, by all accounts, the perfect victim in the worst possible sense, someone whose murder seemed completely random and motiveless. Interviews with friends revealed that Jessica had spent her last evening at the Moonlight Diner, a popular hangout spot where teenagers gathered after high school football games and college students came home for summer break. She had been seen talking to several people, laughing with friends, and appearing completely normal. Nothing suggested she was in danger or that anyone wished her harm. The physical evidence was minimal. The crime scene had been contaminated by the jogger who discovered the body, and a brief rainstorm the previous night had washed away potential DNA evidence that wouldn't have been recoverable with 1984 technology anyway. The killer had been careful, leaving behind only questions and a community forever changed. As weeks turned to months and months turned to years, the Jessica Mitchell murder became Clearwater Springs' defining tragedy. It was the case that broke Detective Morrison's heart, the mystery that parents whispered about when they thought their children couldn't hear, and the cold case that would eventually span 4 decades. But in 2023, advanced DNA technology and a database match would finally reveal a truth so shocking that it would stun not just the Mitchell family, but an entire town that thought they knew all their neighbors' secrets. The killer had been hiding in plain sight all along. Clearwater Springs in 1984 was the embodiment of small-town America, a place where time seemed to move slower and problems felt manageable. Nestled between Tampa and St. Petersburg, this community of 8,500 residents prided itself on being a safe haven from the urban chaos that plagued larger Florida cities. The town's main strip consisted of family-owned businesses that had operated for generations. Murphy's hardware store, where old-timers gathered each morning to discuss weather and politics. Sal's barbershop with its spinning red and white pole, and the First National Bank of Clearwater Springs, housed in a building that hadn't changed since the 1940s. The economic backbone of the town rested on three pillars: agriculture, particularly citrus groves that stretched for miles in every direction, a small manufacturing plant that produced boat parts, and the steady stream of retirees who chose Clearwater Springs for its affordable housing and peaceful atmosphere. Most families had lived there for decades, creating an intricate web of relationships where everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least thought they did. Jessica Lynn Mitchell was born into this tight-knit community on March 15, 1965, to Robert and Linda Mitchell. Robert worked as a supervisor at the boat parts factory, a steady job that provided middle-class stability for his family. Linda taught third grade at Clearwater Springs Elementary, where she was beloved by students and parents alike for her patience and creativity. The Mitchells lived in a modest two-bedroom house on Maple Street, painted yellow with white shutters, surrounded by Linda's prized rose garden that bloomed spectacularly each spring. Jessica was their only child, and from an early age, she displayed the kind of warmth and intelligence that made adults predict great things for her future. She excelled academically at Clearwater Springs High School, where she served as student council treasurer and captain of the debate team. Her teachers consistently praised her work ethic and natural leadership abilities. Jessica had a particular gift for connecting with younger children, often volunteering to tutor struggling students and helping with after-school programs. During her senior year, Jessica began dating Michael Thompson, a quiet, studious boy whose family owned Thompson's Auto Repair on the outskirts of town. Their relationship was the kind that made parents smile, innocent, respectful, and built on genuine friendship. Michael planned to attend community college while working at his father's shop, and Jessica had been accepted to Florida State University with plans to major in elementary education. The summer of 1984 found Jessica home from her freshman year at FSU, working part-time at the Clearwater Springs Public Library to earn money for her sophomore year expenses. She shelved books, helped elderly patrons find large print novels, and organized the children's reading program that had become increasingly popular under her enthusiastic leadership. Library director Margaret Hayes often commented that Jessica had a natural ability to make everyone feel welcome and important. Clearwater Springs, in the mid-1980s, was experiencing the same cultural shifts affecting small towns across America. The younger generation was beginning to look beyond the town's borders for opportunities, while older residents worried about losing the values and traditions that had defined their community for generations. There was tension between those who wanted to preserve the town's rural character and others who believed economic growth was necessary for survival. The social fabric of the town was woven through institutions that brought people together, the Methodist and Baptist churches that anchored opposite ends of Main Street, the Lions Club that organized the annual 4th of July celebration, the high school football team that united the entire community on Friday nights, and the volunteer fire department where men gathered not just to respond to emergencies, but to maintain friendships that often lasted lifetimes. Crime in Clearwater Springs was virtually non-existent. Police Chief Robert Manning's biggest concerns typically involved teenagers drinking beer behind the old grain elevator, occasional domestic disputes that were usually resolved with stern warnings and family mediation. and the rare burglary that shocked the community precisely because such violations of trust were so uncommon. The town's sense of security was so complete that many residents never locked their doors. Children rode bicycles freely throughout the neighborhoods. Parents allowed teenagers to stay out late without worry, and women felt safe walking alone after dark. This collective innocence would make Jessica's murder not just a personal tragedy for the Mitchell family, but a fundamental assault on everything Clearwater Springs believed about itself. In July 1984, the town was preparing for its annual Founders' Day celebration, a weekend festival that drew visitors from surrounding communities and represented the pinnacle of local pride and unity. Jessica had volunteered to help coordinate the children's activities, excited to put her education major skills to practical use. Nobody could have imagined that within weeks, this peaceful community would become synonymous with unsolved murder and shattered trust. July 22, 1984, began as an ordinary Sunday in Clearwater Springs. The temperature climbed to a sweltering 94 degrees by afternoon, typical for Florida's brutal summer season. Jessica Mitchell had spent the morning at First Baptist Church with her parents, wearing a light blue sundress that her mother had bought her for Easter. After the service, the family enjoyed their traditional Sunday lunch at home before Jessica announced her plans to meet friends at the Moonlight Diner that evening. The Moonlight Diner served as the unofficial social headquarters for Clearwater Springs' younger crowd. Located on Highway 19, the Chrome and Neon establishment had been a local institution since the 1950s, complete with red vinyl booths, a jukebox filled with current hits, and waitresses who knew every customer's usual order. On weekend evenings, the parking lot filled with pickup trucks, muscle cars, and the occasional motorcycle as teenagers and young adults gathered to see and be seen. Jessica arrived at the diner around 7:30 p.m. Driving her father's 1981 Ford Escort, she joined a group of friends at their regular booth near the back, ordering her usual vanilla milkshake and sharing a plate of French fries. Witnesses later described her as being in excellent spirits, laughing frequently and discussing her upcoming return to Florida State University. She wore the same blue sundress from church, along with the delicate gold necklace that would later become crucial evidence in her murder. The evening progressed normally until approximately 9:45 p.m. when Jessica excused herself to use the restroom. Security cameras, a rarity in 1984 small-town establishments, did not exist at the Moonlight Diner. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing Jessica walk toward the back of the restaurant, but accounts of what happened next would prove frustratingly inconsistent during the subsequent investigation. Some patrons reported seeing Jessica briefly step outside through the diner's rear exit, possibly to get fresh air or make a phone call from the payphone located near the back door. Others insisted they never saw her leave the building. The confusion would later be attributed to the typical chaos of a busy weekend evening, with people coming and going constantly and attention focused on conversations rather than individual movements. What investigators would eventually establish was that Jessica never returned to her table. Her friends initially assumed she had encountered someone she knew and was socializing elsewhere in the diner. When 30 minutes passed without her return, they began searching the restaurant and asking other patrons if they had seen her. The search expanded to the parking lot, where they discovered her father's Ford Escort still parked in the same spot where she had left it. Keys nowhere to be found. Michael Thompson, Jessica's boyfriend, had been working late at his family's auto repair shop and was not at the diner that evening. When friends called him around 10:30 p.m. to report Jessica's disappearance, he immediately drove to the Moonlight Diner to join the search. The group spent over an hour combing the area, checking nearby businesses and walking the stretch of Highway 19 in both directions, calling Jessica's name into the humid night air. At 11:45 p.m., Jessica's friends made the decision to contact her parents. Robert and Linda Mitchell arrived at the diner within minutes, their concern escalating to panic when they realized their daughter had truly vanished. Chief Manning was called to the scene at 12:15 a.m., marking the official beginning of what would become the most significant criminal investigation in Clearwater Springs history. The initial search focused on the immediate area around the Moonlight Diner. Officers used flashlights to examine the wooded area behind the restaurant, the drainage ditches along Highway 19, and the abandoned gas station across the street. They found Jessica's purse in tall grass, approximately 50 yards behind the diner, its contents scattered, but her wallet and identification intact, ruling out robbery as a motive. At dawn on July 23rd, the search expanded to include Riverside Park, located roughly 2 miles from the Moonlight Diner. At 6:47 a.m., jogger Harold Peterson discovered Jessica's body near the park's boat launch, partially concealed by palmetto bushes. She had been strangled with her own gold necklace, the delicate chain twisted so tightly around her neck that it had embedded in her skin. The medical examiner would later determine that Jessica had died between 10:30 p.m. and midnight on July 22nd. There were no signs of sexual assault, no defensive wounds on her hands or arms, and no indication that she had fought her attacker. The killer had been swift, efficient, and careful to leave minimal evidence behind. Detective Frank Morrison arrived at Riverside Park at 7:15 a.m. on July 23, 1984, to find a crime scene that had already been compromised beyond repair. Harold Peterson, the jogger who discovered Jessica's body, had not only approached the victim, but had also attempted to check for a pulse, inadvertently disturbing potential evidence. Well-meaning park maintenance workers had trampled through the area, and curious onlookers had gathered before police could establish a proper perimeter. The Clearwater Springs Police Department's inexperience with homicide investigations became immediately apparent. Chief Manning had called the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for assistance, but state investigators wouldn't arrive until the following day. In the crucial first hours, local officers made several critical mistakes that would haunt the investigation for decades. The crime scene was photographed using an outdated camera that produced grainy, poorly lit images. Evidence collection was haphazard, with officers lacking proper training in forensic procedures. The area around Jessica's body was searched, but the investigation team failed to expand their search radius sufficiently, potentially missing crucial evidence that might have been discarded by the killer during his escape. Morrison focused his initial investigation on the most obvious suspects. Michael Thompson, Jessica's boyfriend, became the primary person of interest despite having a solid alibi. His whereabouts at Thompson's auto repair were verified by his father and 2 customers who had picked up vehicles that evening. Nevertheless, Morrison subjected Michael to 3 separate interrogations, convinced that domestic violence was the most likely explanation for the murder. The detective's tunnel vision on Michael led to precious time being wasted during the critical first week of the investigation. While Morrison pursued this dead-end theory, other potential leads grew cold. Witnesses at the Moonlight Diner were not interviewed until 5 days after the murder, by which time their memories had become less reliable and details had begun to blur. The investigation's second major error involved the handling of physical evidence. The gold necklace used to strangle Jessica was sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab, but the chain of custody was poorly documented. The evidence bag was not properly sealed, and the necklace was handled by multiple people without gloves, contaminating any potential fingerprints or DNA evidence that might have been recoverable with future technology. Morrison's team also failed to conduct a thorough canvass of the area between the Moonlight Diner and Riverside Park. Several residents along the route reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles or hearing unusual sounds on the night of the murder, but these reports were not collected systematically. One elderly woman claimed to have seen a man walking along Highway 19 around 11 p.m., but her statement was dismissed because she was considered an unreliable witness due to her age and poor eyesight. The investigation took another problematic turn when Morrison became fixated on a drifter named Raymond Kowalski, who had been seen in the area several days before the murder. Kowalski had a criminal record for petty theft and had been asking for work at local businesses. When he couldn't be located immediately after the murder, Morrison issued a statewide BOLO alert, convinced he had found his suspect. Kowalski was arrested 3 weeks later in Jacksonville on an unrelated charge. Despite having no physical evidence connecting him to Jessica's murder and an alibi placing him in Gainesville on the night of the crime, Morrison continued to pursue him as the primary suspect for months. This obsession prevented the detective from exploring other avenues of investigation and allowed the real killer's trail to grow increasingly cold. The media attention surrounding the case created additional pressure that led to more investigative mistakes. Eager to show progress, Chief Manning held daily press conferences where he inadvertently revealed details about the investigation that should have been kept confidential. This information allowed the actual perpetrator to stay ahead of the investigation and avoid detection. Perhaps most damaging was the failure to properly interview all patrons who had been at the Moonlight Diner on the night of the murder. The restaurant's informal atmosphere meant that many customers came and went without being noticed by staff or other patrons. Several individuals who had been present that evening were never identified or questioned, creating gaps in the timeline that would prove impossible to fill later. By the end of 1984, the investigation had stalled completely. Morrison had exhausted his limited leads, alienated potential witnesses through aggressive questioning, and failed to develop any viable suspects beyond the already cleared Michael Thompson and Raymond Kowalski. By January 1985, the Jessica Mitchell murder investigation had officially become a cold case. Detective Morrison's evidence board, once covered with photographs, witness statements, and red string connecting potential leads, had been reduced to a single folder locked away in the department's filing cabinet. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement had withdrawn their support, reassigning their investigators to more promising cases with fresher leads and better evidence. The impact on the Mitchell family was devastating and enduring. Robert Mitchell, once an outgoing supervisor at the boat parts factory, became withdrawn and suspicious of everyone around him. He began working double shifts to avoid going home to the Yellow House on Maple Street, where Jessica's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it before her final evening. Linda Mitchell took an extended leave of absence from her teaching position, unable to face the children who reminded her daily of the daughter she would never see grow up. The couple's marriage, once strong and supportive, began to fracture under the weight of their shared grief and unanswered questions. Robert became obsessed with conducting his own investigation, spending weekends driving to neighboring towns to question anyone who might have information about his daughter's murder. Linda retreated into herself, finding solace only in the support group for crime victims that met monthly at the Methodist Church. Clearwater Springs itself was forever changed by the unsolved murder. The town's sense of innocence and security had been shattered, replaced by suspicion and fear that would persist for decades. Parents who had once allowed their children to roam freely now imposed strict curfews and demanded to know their whereabouts at all times. The Moonlight Diner, once the heart of the community's social life, saw its business decline as families chose to stay home rather than venture out after dark. Chief Manning retired in 1987, carrying the weight of the unsolved case as his greatest professional failure. His replacement, Chief Patricia Hernandez, inherited a department demoralized by their inability to solve the town's most significant crime. She assigned the case to Detective Sarah Williams, a young investigator who reviewed the evidence with fresh eyes, but found the same dead ends that had frustrated Morrison. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, the case would occasionally resurface in local media, particularly on the anniversary of Jessica's death. The Tampa Bay Times ran annual remembrance articles, and local television stations would revisit the story during slow news periods. Each media mention brought renewed hope to the Mitchell family and a flood of tips to the police department, but none of the leads proved credible or useful. Michael Thompson, Jessica's boyfriend, left Clearwater Springs in 1986, unable to bear the constant reminders of his lost love and the suspicion that some residents continued to harbor about his involvement. He moved to North Carolina, where he eventually married and started a family, but friends reported that he never fully recovered from losing Jessica and being treated as a suspect in her murder. The case files were transferred to new detectives 3 more times over the following decades. Each investigator brought enthusiasm and determination, but the passage of time had made witnesses unreliable, evidence degraded, and leads impossible to pursue. The original crime scene had been developed into a small shopping center, erasing any possibility of discovering overlooked evidence. In 1999, 15 years after the murder, the case received renewed attention when the television show Unsolved Mysteries featured Jessica's story. The episode generated hundreds of tips from across the country, but none provided the breakthrough that investigators desperately needed. The show's attention did result in a small reward fund being established by local businesses, eventually growing to $25,000 for information leading to the killer's arrest. Detective Williams retired in 2003, passing the case to Detective Marcus Rodriguez, who digitized the files and entered the case information into national databases. The evidence was re-examined using improved forensic techniques, but the contamination from the original investigation limited what could be accomplished with the available materials. By 2010, the Jessica Mitchell murder had become Clearwater Springs' most famous unsolved mystery, referenced in local history books and discussed in true crime forums online. Robert Mitchell had died of a heart attack in 2008, never knowing who killed his daughter. Linda Mitchell, now in her 70s, continued to live in the same yellow house, maintaining Jessica's room as a shrine and hoping that someday, somehow, she would finally have answers. The case seemed destined to remain forever unsolved, a permanent scar on a community that had never fully healed from the trauma of that summer night in 1984. In March 2023, nearly 39 years after Jessica Mitchell's murder, Detective Amanda Chen received a routine notification that would finally crack the case that had haunted Clearwater Springs for decades. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement's combined DNA index system had generated a hit on evidence that had been sitting in storage since 1984. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In 2022, the Clearwater Springs Police Department had participated in a federal grant program designed to help small agencies process cold case evidence using advanced DNA technology. The gold necklace that had been used to strangle Jessica was re-examined using techniques that didn't exist in 1984. Forensic scientists were able to extract a partial DNA profile from skin cells that had been preserved on the chain's clasp. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, where it sat for months without generating any matches. However, in early 2023, a routine arrest in Ocala, Florida, provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Thomas Eugene Hartwell, a 67-year-old retired construction worker, had been arrested for driving under the influence. As required by Florida law, his DNA was collected and entered into the database. The match was immediate and undeniable. Thomas Hartwell's DNA profile was consistent with the genetic material found on Jessica's necklace. Detective Chen, who had inherited the case just 2 years earlier, could hardly believe the notification when it appeared on her computer screen. After decades of dead ends and false leads, the killer had finally been identified through the power of modern forensic science. Chen's investigation into Hartwell revealed a disturbing pattern that explained why he had never been considered a suspect in the original investigation. In 1984, Hartwell had been a 28-year-old transient worker who traveled throughout Florida taking temporary construction jobs. He had no permanent address, no criminal record, and no known connections to Clearwater Springs or Jessica Mitchell. Employment records showed that Hartwell had been working on a road construction project approximately 15 miles from Clearwater Springs during the week of Jessica's murder. The project had been completed on July 20th, 1984, just 2 days before the murder. Hartwell had been staying at a cheap motel on Highway 19, less than 3 miles from the Moonlight Diner. Further investigation revealed that Hartwell had a history of violence against women that had gone largely undetected due to his transient lifestyle. Police departments in 6 different Florida counties had reports of assaults, attempted rapes, and suspicious behavior involving Hartwell dating back to the early 1980s. However, the lack of communication between agencies and the primitive information-sharing systems of that era meant that no one had connected these incidents to establish a pattern. The most chilling discovery came when Chen examined Hartwell's movements in the months following Jessica's murder. He had left Florida entirely, traveling to Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee, where similar unsolved murders of young women had occurred between 1984 and 1987. The victims shared striking similarities to Jessica: young, attractive, strangled with their own jewelry or clothing, and killed in small towns where Hartwell had been working construction projects. Chen coordinated with law enforcement agencies in these other states, sharing Hartwell's DNA profile and employment history. Within weeks, DNA evidence linked him to 3 additional murders that had remained unsolved for decades. The man who had killed Jessica Mitchell was revealed to be a serial killer who had operated across the southeastern United States for years. Hartwell's arrest on April 15, 2023, was conducted quietly to avoid media attention that might compromise the ongoing investigations in other states. He was taken into custody at his modest apartment in Ocala, where he'd been living under his real name since 2010. Neighbors described him as a quiet, unremarkable man who kept to himself and showed no signs of the violence that had defined his younger years. The evidence against Hartwell was overwhelming. In addition to the DNA match, investigators found a small box in his apartment containing newspaper clippings about Jessica's murder and the other unsolved cases. He had kept these mementos for nearly 4 decades, a grisly collection that documented his crimes and revealed the calculated nature of his actions. On May 3, 2023, Thomas Eugene Hartwell was formally charged with the first-degree murder of Jessica Lynn Mitchell. The announcement sent shockwaves through Clearwater Springs, where many residents had given up hope that the case would ever be solved. The news of Thomas Hartwell's arrest spread through Clearwater Springs like wildfire on May 3, 2023. Within hours of the official announcement, every major news outlet in Florida had descended upon the small town that had waited nearly 4 decades for this moment. The courthouse steps where Detective Chen held her press conference became the epicenter of a media frenzy that dwarfed even the original coverage from 1984. Linda Mitchell, now 79 years old and the sole surviving member of Jessica's immediate family, received the news at her home on Maple Street. The yellow house with white shutters had barely changed since 1984, and Jessica's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it. Linda's reaction was a complex mixture of relief, grief, and overwhelming exhaustion. After spending most of her adult life wondering who had killed her daughter, she finally had an answer. But it came too late for her husband Robert to share in the closure. The revelation that Jessica's killer was a complete stranger who had never been on law enforcement's radar fundamentally changed how the community understood the crime. For decades, residents had harbored suspicions about neighbors, friends, and acquaintances. The knowledge that the killer had been a transient worker who disappeared immediately after the murder lifted a cloud of mistrust that had hung over the town for generations. Michael Thompson, Jessica's former boyfriend who had endured years of suspicion and whispered accusations, learned of the arrest at his home in North Carolina. Now 57 years old with a family of his own, he had never fully escaped the shadow of Jessica's murder. The vindication was bittersweet, coming after decades of carrying the burden of being considered a suspect by some members of his former community. The Tampa Bay Times ran a front-page story with the headline, "39-Year Mystery Solved. DNA Catches Clearwater Springs Killer." The article detailed not only Hartwell's arrest, but also the technological advances that had made the breakthrough possible. The story sparked national interest, with CNN, Fox News, and other major networks picking up the coverage and examining how modern forensic science was solving cold cases across the country. Detective Chen became the face of the investigation's successful conclusion, but she was careful to credit the persistence of previous investigators and the power of advancing technology. Her press conferences emphasized that while justice had finally been served for Jessica, the case highlighted the importance of never giving up on unsolved crimes and the need for continued investment in forensic science capabilities. The broader implications of Hartwell's arrest extended far beyond Clearwater Springs. Law enforcement agencies in Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee confirmed that DNA evidence had linked him to 3 additional murders from the 1980s. The FBI announced that they were reviewing dozens of other unsolved cases from the same time period, potentially making Hartwell one of the most prolific serial killers of his generation. Hartwell himself remained largely silent following his arrest, providing no confession or explanation for his crimes. His court-appointed attorney indicated that he would likely plead guilty to avoid the death penalty, bringing the legal proceedings to a relatively swift conclusion. The man who had terrorized multiple communities and destroyed countless lives would spend his remaining years in prison, finally held accountable for his actions. The Moonlight Diner, which had closed permanently in 2018, became an unexpected pilgrimage site for true crime enthusiasts and journalists covering the story. The building stood empty, its neon sign dark, but it remained a powerful symbol of the night that changed everything for Clearwater Springs. As the initial media attention began to fade, Clearwater Springs was left to process the complex emotions that came with finally solving their most notorious crime. The resolution brought closure, but it also forced the community to confront how the unsolved murder had shaped their identity for nearly 4 decades. Jessica Lynn Mitchell could finally rest in peace, her killer brought to justice through the persistence of investigators and the power of science. Her story became a testament to the importance of never abandoning hope, even when cases seem impossible to solve. The truth had finally set Clearwater Springs free.